If someone had told me that a single doorbell on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon would change the rhythm of my heart, I would have laughed. I don't live in the kind of days that tremble easily anymore. Surprises, romance, shifts of fate. I folded those things up long ago, tucked them neatly into the quietest drawers of this quiet little house. And yet, one ring, one person stepping across the threshold, one glance held a second too long, one harmless greeting, and suddenly, all the things I thought I had forgotten began to stir. That afternoon, the breeze slipped through the kitchen window, teasing the corner of my old linen curtain. I had just finished folding laundry and was about to reward myself with a second cup of coffee when the doorbell rang. Funny thing, a house that's been quiet long enough turns any sound into something startling. And sometimes it's not that the bell is too loud. It's that the heart hasn't been knocked on in a while. I walked to the door. No message. No delivery. No one had any real reason to visit a middle-aged woman living alone in an aging house at the end of a sleepy cul-de-sac. I opened the door. And just like that, silence didn't live here anymore. Standing in front of me, tall, bright-eyed, with that warm, familiar smile, was Evan, my son's childhood best friend. 10 years. It had been 10 years since I last saw that boy. Since they both moved away, took separate paths, and I assumed Evan would remain a string of photos buried somewhere in my phone. But now, it wasn't that boy standing in front of me. It was a man. Confident. Composed. Something about him made me pause. Not because I didn't recognize him, but because my heart hadn't braced itself for a flutter that light. His voice was deeper, but it still held that familiar mischief. I laughed, though I wasn't sure if it was from nerves or something far more tender.
Hi, Mrs. Whitman. I was driving through, thought of you. Hope I'm not intruding? Hi, Mrs. Whitman. I was driving through, thought of you. Hope I'm not intruding?
There was no thunder, no flash of lightning, just an ordinary evening. So normal it almost slipped by unnoticed. And maybe that's why. I didn't see it coming. Evan stayed. After the coffee. After a simple dinner of roasted chicken and asparagus. After two people who once existed in each other's memories sat side by side, speaking softly about things no one had asked them in years.
You still make it the same. Just like you used to when we were kids. I can't believe it still tastes exactly the same.
And you, I smiled, still have a way of making people feel like time just rewound itself. We started with the easy things. The food, the childhood mischief. That one time he broke my favorite vase and left a handwritten apology in the most crooked, earnest handwriting. But slowly, without either of us steering it, the conversation drifted, as if emotions knew their way better than we did. By the time I glanced at the clock, it was past 10 p.m., and we were still there, sitting in the soft amber light over the dining table. The light softened Evan's face. His eyes seemed deeper, and the years between us, so obvious just hours before, suddenly blurred. He spoke about his mother. She had passed 3 years ago, after a stroke. His voice cracked in the middle. I didn't ask questions. I just placed my hand on the table, close to his, not touching, but near enough to say, "You're being heard. Fully. Truly." Then it was my turn. I talked about Nate's father, my ex-husband, someone I hadn't mentioned aloud in a long time. A kind man, distant, a marriage with no drama, and no real end. Just a quiet unraveling, until we both woke up one morning and realized we no longer had a reason to ask each other if we'd eaten. And Evan said, his voice brushing the edge of the window frame like wind,
I used to think that you were the strongest woman I knew.
I smiled faintly, not sure if that was a compliment or just a polite way of saying, you seem like someone who didn't need to be asked how you were doing. Do you ever feel like? He hesitated.
Like you missed something that was supposed to be just yours?
I tightened my grip on the wine glass, not because it was a hard question, but because it was perfectly timed. Yes, I said. Often. But life doesn't always ask us what we want before it begins. We sat in silence after that. A silence so full, you could hear the clock tick like a metronome to a song our hearts had already started humming. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't temptation. It was something quieter and maybe braver. It was realizing you can still feel something, That night I lay awake in bed, my eyes fixed on the ceiling, as if the answer might write itself up there. Evan was in the room down the hallway, the same room he and my son once shared after long nights of video games. The room where my mother stayed when she visited. A room now holding a man. A grown man. I told myself, he's just an old friend. That's all. But deep down, I knew something had shifted. Softly, almost imperceptibly. But enough to wake my heart from a sleep that had lasted far too long. Some emotions don't start with a touch. They begin with silence that's truly listened to. And once that begins, even if no one has done anything wrong, nothing is quite the same again. It didn't rain that morning, but I heard it anyway. Not outside, but somewhere inside me. It wasn't the kind of rain that makes you reach for an umbrella, just the kind that fogs your thoughts like a misted window pane. I woke up at 6 a.m., as usual, sat for a moment on the edge of my bed, feet not yet touching the floor. The house was quiet, like always, but somehow, it no longer felt the same. Something had shifted, in the way the hardwood creaked beneath my steps, in the air between the walls, in the silence that now carried a new kind of weight. Maybe it was the dream I had, a dream I shouldn't have dreamt, of a look held too long, of a silence too honest, of a warmth just beyond the paper-thin wall. Evan was still asleep, his door slightly ajar, just enough to remind me he was still there. And just knowing he was there made me move more gently, made me quieter with my own breathing. I went to the kitchen and made coffee, a ritual repeated for decades. But this morning when I poured the first cup, I poured two. Immediately, I scolded myself. Why assume he'd want coffee? Why pour it ahead of time, as if we shared some unspoken routine? Then I heard footsteps behind me. He asked, voice groggy, hair tousled. I said, of course. Then we drank our coffee on the front porch. The breeze carried the scent of damp earth, maple leaves beginning to change. It felt like the whole world was shifting seasons gently, and I was caught in that in-between moment, where you don't know if something is ending, or just beginning. And he asked me. I do, but not always in the way that counts. He turned to look at me, didn't say a word, just looked. And in that look, I felt heard in a way I hadn't in a long time. The rest of the day moved quietly. I trimmed some plants, reorganized the bookshelf, cleaned the windows. Evan said he was going to head downtown for a few errands, and that he'd be back by early evening. I nodded. I didn't ask, are you sure? Didn't let myself appear eager. But inside, I was hoping he'd come back. The sun dipped low early that evening, stretching across the upstairs hallway like a golden carpet. I cooked dinner. Nothing elaborate, just pan-seared chicken and sautéed greens. But I plated it carefully, laid out soft beige placemats, and lit a small candle. I didn't put on makeup, but I did change sweaters into one softer, more fitted. Not for anyone else, I told myself, but for me, the version of me that had forgotten what it felt like to want to be seen. He returned just as the sky turned that dusky blue-violet. In his hand, a small bottle of wine and a bunch of wildflowers. Not the kind wrapped in paper from a high-end florist. Just a few sprigs of chamomile, a little dried lavender, bound with a simple twine bow, as if the person who picked them had pictured me when they walked into the shop.
For you. You once said you didn't grow lavender, but you loved the scent.
He said, his voice as soft as the breeze. I froze for just a moment. I hadn't said that yesterday. It was something I'd said years ago. One afternoon, while brewing tea for two boys doing math homework at my kitchen table, I had said it casually, more to myself than anyone else. I love lavender, but it doesn't grow well here. It's a shame. And somehow, he remembered. He remembered something that didn't matter, but it mattered to me. Some people walk into your life once and leave behind a whisper. Others return, say very little, but awaken a voice in you you haven't heard in years. Not because they're special, but because they know how to listen to the part of you that's been silent for far too long. He said, his voice as soft as the breeze. I froze for just a moment. I hadn't said that yesterday. It was something I'd said years ago. One afternoon, while brewing tea for two boys doing math homework at my kitchen table, I had said it casually, more to myself than anyone else. I love lavender, but it doesn't grow well here. It's a shame. And somehow, he remembered. He remembered something that didn't matter, but it mattered to me. Some people walk into your life once and leave behind a whisper. Others return, say very little, but awaken a voice in you you haven't heard in years. Not because they're special, but because they know how to listen to the part of you that's been silent for far too long. He said, his voice as soft as the breeze. I froze for just a moment. I hadn't said that yesterday. It was something I'd said years ago. One afternoon, while brewing tea for two boys doing math homework at my kitchen table, I had said it casually, more to myself than anyone else. I love lavender, but it doesn't grow well here. It's a shame. And somehow, he remembered. He remembered something that didn't matter, but it mattered to me. Some people walk into your life once and leave behind a whisper. Others return, say very little, but awaken a voice in you you haven't heard in years. Not because they're special, but because they know how to listen to the part of you that's been silent for far too long. Some mornings don't need an alarm clock, because your heart is what wakes up first. That morning was one of them. I woke before the sun reached the window, and inside me was a strange kind of stillness. Not sadness, not anticipation, just a kind of quiet clarity, like a lake untouched by wind. I made coffee, poured 2 cups without thinking, as if it was the most natural thing in the world, even though for the last 10 years, this kitchen table has only had one place set. Sunlight poured into the kitchen, and the dust in the air sparkled like fragments of light I had never truly noticed before. Or maybe, I had simply never taken the time to really see it, until today. Evan walked in, same gray t-shirt from yesterday, hair slightly tousled, but something about him had changed. Or maybe it was me, maybe I had changed the way I saw. He smiled, phone still in hand mid-text. I asked him, cinnamon in your coffee as usual?
More than usual, actually.
We ate breakfast in comfortable quiet. The sound of a knife slicing toast, a spoon gently resting on a plate, and a sigh. Neither of us knew who it came from. No words were needed to know that something was quietly blooming between us, as steady and soft as the morning light stretching across the floorboards. After breakfast, I asked Evan to join me out back. Want to take a little walk? The maple's turning early this year. He walked beside me, hands tucked into his pockets, eyes tracing every patch of flower bed, every small stone along the path. You still care for all of this yourself? He asked. Ego. It's like tending to myself, every morning, a little at a time. I hadn't realized I'd said it aloud. Evan looked over at me, but this time he wasn't just looking. He was seeing and said. I didn't say anything, because a part of me had finally let go of its guard. We sat on the old wooden bench beneath the maple tree. I told him about those early days after the divorce, after Nate moved out, when this house stopped feeling like a home and started feeling more like a frame, holding the shape of hollow routines. He told me about his time in Seattle and a 3-year relationship that ended not with drama, but with silence. We didn't break up because anything went wrong, he said. We ended it because nothing felt right anymore. There was a long pause. Evan looked down, as if listening to something inside himself. I don't know, he said softly, but when I'm here, I feel like I can finally breathe. Freer? I asked. Truer, he answered. Like I don't have to play any role at all. We sat in silence, the kind of silence that presses gently against your chest and makes you want to tell the truth. Just a glance, a finger lightly brushing the edge of the bench, a breath neither of us tried to hide. And I knew the distance between us was thinning. Later that afternoon, Evan said he had to meet a client downtown, but that he'd come back. And I asked him tonight, trying and failing to sound casual.
If the invitation still stands.
I smiled. It always does. As he stepped through the door, the late sun cast gold across his shoulders. And I don't know why, but I stood there longer than I should have, my hand resting on the edge of the door, as if afraid that closing it might shut out something just beginning. There are habits you thought had gone silent, that only needed one person to walk through the room for the light to come pouring back in. You don't need to name what's arriving. You just have to stop pushing it away. I told myself at least 3 times that tonight was just an ordinary dinner, that I cooked like I always do, that I wore the soft dress because the weather had warmed, not because someone was coming back, that I wasn't expecting anything, except, maybe, the sound of a doorbell right on time. But by the time I was standing in front of the mirror, brushing my hair for the second time, I knew I was lying. Evan came back at 7:13. I heard the slow stop of his car in the driveway, the familiar rhythm of his steps along the stone path, and something inside my chest rang like a crystal glass brimming too close to the edge. The door opened. There he stood, holding a bottle of red wine and a small bouquet, not polished like store-bought ones but wildflowers tied gently with twine, white daisies, sprigs of lavender, and a few soft mint leaves.
These are for you. No real reason, but if I needed one, I'd say this house deserves flowers.
I took them, hands trembling just enough to notice. Thank you, not just for the flowers, but for still knowing how to make someone smile, without even trying. We had dinner by candlelight, the kind of light that doesn't glamorize anything, but doesn't hide anything either. The wine softened everything. Our conversation drifted through books, old songs, old movies, and then to a story about how he almost proposed to a woman in Italy, but never asked the question, why not? I asked. Evan took a slow sip of wine, watching the candle flicker. Because when I was about to say it, I realized I didn't want her forever. I just didn't want to feel alone anymore. I looked at him for a long moment, not out of pity, but because I had done the opposite. Stayed too long, even after the silence between us became the loudest sound in the room. After dinner, he helped with the dishes, sleeves rolled up, hands wet. He laughed when I accidentally splashed soap on his shirt. I tossed him a towel, he caught it, but his fingers brushed mine a little longer than necessary. That touch was light, like 2 people pressing their palms to a thin pane of glass, unsure if it would crack, but also not pulling away. Have you ever thought about starting over? He asked, voice low, eyes still on the plate in his hand. I looked up. I have, but the older you get, the harder it is to believe that you're still worthy of something new. You are, he said, soft as a breeze, steady as stone. I don't know why I needed to say it, but I think, if I didn't, I'd regret it. I didn't answer, just stood still, fingertips resting on the edge of the sink. But inside me, something knocked gently, and a door creaked open. That night, we didn't cross any lines. There were no kisses. No one stepped into the other's room. We simply sat on the sofa, firelight flickering, 2 wine glasses slowly emptying, our hands close enough that a shift in wind might make them meet. And when I stood up to go to bed, Evan reached out, just a light touch on my hand, a fleeting gesture that said, I'm here, if you want to feel this. I turned away, but my heart didn't. Some feelings don't barge into your life. They wait quietly, until you've cleared just enough space in your heart for them not to be mistaken as wrong. And when you touch something truly beautiful, you don't want to name it too soon, because maybe for the first time, you don't want to break it with words. I lay in bed, moonlight slipping through the curtains, casting a pale streak on the dark wooden footboard. The house was completely quiet, but I wasn't. I couldn't sleep. Not because of the wine, not because of the ticking clock, but because of something stronger. A quiet stirring inside me, slow and distinct, but undeniable. He was in the room across the hall, just a wall away, just a door away. But when did distance stop being about space and start being about what we keep inside? The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, not out of habit, but because I needed to prepare for something I wasn't sure would even happen. I made coffee, washed my face with cold water, reset the breakfast table, not because it was messy, but because I wanted everything in its place, as if neatness could somehow contain whatever I was feeling. Evan came down the stairs at 7:40, white button-up shirt, dark jeans. His sleeves rolled just high enough to reveal sun-browned wrists. He looked polished, familiar, dangerously comfortable. Did you sleep all right? he asked softly. Somewhat, I said. You? Better than I thought I would. We had breakfast like two old friends, but no one mentioned the night before. No one asked, but no one forgot. After breakfast, Evan stepped out back to take a phone call. I stood in the kitchen, rinsing a glass, my hand trembling just slightly, because I knew, after that call, he would leave again. Leave this house. And I wasn't sure if I wanted that to happen. When he came back inside, he said, I'll be heading out in about 30 minutes. But if the invitation still stands, I'd like to return. I didn't know what to say for a few moments, so I nodded. That afternoon, I couldn't concentrate on anything. I tidied a corner, then found myself standing still, staring out the window. I wandered into the garden, clipping dry stems from the white daisies. My hands moved, but my mind kept circling. Is something truly waiting here? Or am I just making something up that was never meant to be? I've never been in a situation like this before. There's no handbook for how a woman in her 50s is supposed to act. When her son's childhood best friend, now a grown man, looks at her, as if he's seeing something no one else ever has. I never used to ask myself, am I allowed to feel this? But today, that question wouldn't leave me alone. Not as I passed the little things he'd left behind. The coffee mug, the shirt draped over the chair, the wild lavender bouquet still fragrant on the windowsill. That evening when Evan returned, I wasn't sure what I felt anymore. Relief? Nervousness? Or fear? He brought a small box of pastries and said, I passed this little place on my way back. They still make those cinnamon apple tarts you used to love, right? I laughed. What are you trying to do? Evan. He looked straight at me, unflinching. Nothing, just remembering something real. We had a late dinner. No candles. No flowers. None were necessary, because every bit of space between us had already been shortened, not by words, but by silences that no longer felt lonely. After dinner, he helped clean up, wiped down counters, put away silverware, moved around the kitchen like he'd been there before. And then, when he stood close to me, when his hand brushed mine again, I looked into his eyes, and I knew this was the moment I had to decide. Not whether or not I was falling in love, but whether I was brave enough to step out of the emotional borders I'd built around myself for years. I said, barely above a whisper, so quietly even I was surprised. You once said, you didn't want me to think this was just a fleeting feeling. It's not, he replied immediately. I've never been more certain of anything. And if I'm not ready to name this, then I'll still be here, he said. Not to name it, just to be here. There are lines we draw to protect ourselves. And then, someone comes along, not to cross them, but to sit just on the other side, and wait, for us to step across with our own feet. No one can force you to start over. But if someone comes along, who makes you no longer want to live the way you did, maybe that's a voice inside your heart, worth listening to. That night there was no moon, but somehow the air between us felt brighter than any light outside. Evan sat beside me on the long bench by the window. No more fireplace. No more sofa. Just two people in the soft hush of a dim lamp, bright enough to see each other, dark enough not to hide. He told me a story from years ago, the first time he came to our house back in 5th grade. He got lost walking from school, and I found him at the end of the street. You held my hand when we crossed, he said. And it was the first time I remember an adult not rushing, not annoyed, just gentle. I laughed softly. You must be remembering it wrong. I wasn't exactly known for being gentle with mischievous boys. No, he shook his head. I've never forgotten that hand. I stayed quiet, but my hand rested on my knee, close enough to his that, if a breeze drifted through, we might have touched. There's a kind of intimacy that doesn't come from touching, but from the courage to not hide anymore. The way he looked at me, not like a man looks at a woman he finds attractive, but like someone who has stopped being afraid and is finally able to see. I asked, doesn't this all feel strange to you? Does it feel strange to you? It feels unfamiliar, but not wrong. Then I feel the same. When I stood to clear our wine glasses, my hand trembled slightly, not from the wine, but from the quiet knowing. From this point on, We could no longer say nothing's happened. Evan stepped forward to take the glass from my hand. No words. Just a short moment. His fingers brushing the back of my hand, and I knew he felt it too. After the late dinner, we didn't talk much. We each sat at opposite ends of the couch, but the space between us didn't feel like something to cross anymore. Softened. I still don't know where this is going, I confessed, eyes on the worn rug beneath our feet. You don't have to, he replied. All I know is, if I leave now, I'll regret it for a long time. I looked up at him, and for the first time, I didn't have to be strong. I didn't have to be the mom. I didn't have to be the good host. I didn't have to be the woman who had grown so used to being alone. I just got to be me, with a heart slowly, quietly thawing. As the late-night hour slipped in through the windows, I stood at the foot of the stairs, hesitant. Evan walked over, but didn't cross the line. He only said, "Good night, Claire." "Good night, Evan." Then he gently touched my shoulder. A brief touch, just enough that neither of us had to look away. And I stood there for a long time after he climbed the stairs, because I knew, not all love has to explode to be real. Some things are strong enough to exist just by being present. Some truths don't need to be named to be known. They don't need grand gestures. They don't need promises. Just someone willing to stay, not out of obligation, not out of duty, but because they see you, even when you haven't yet dared to see yourself. That morning, I woke up earlier than usual, not because of a dream, not because of an alarm clock, just because I had finally slept enough, deeply, for the first time in a long time. I stepped out of bed and threw open the curtains. Sunlight poured in like an old friend, not loud, not demanding, just present. And for the first time, I didn't shy away from it. I slipped on an earth-tone sweater, soft cotton pants, and loosely tied my hair up, not to prepare for anyone, but because today I wanted to care for myself like I mattered. When I walked downstairs, Evan was already there, holding a cup of coffee, leaning against the old wooden table, eyes reading a few lines from a book I'd forgotten I owned. He looked up and smiled. "Good morning." "Good morning," I replied, sitting across from him. Naturally, effortlessly, we sat there for a long while, not talking, just sipping coffee, looking at each other, unhurried. And I knew I had crossed the biggest boundary of my life, the one that said I didn't deserve to feel happy. After breakfast, I went out to the garden, not to pass the time, but to be in it, fully, without worrying about tomorrow or regretting yesterday. I rolled up my sleeves and planted a new patch of mint. Evan stood beside me, holding a small trowel. He didn't ask what I was doing, just extended his hand whenever I needed it. We gardened like two companions, not rushing toward a result, just being present. That afternoon, we walked around the lake, not like two people testing out feelings, but like two people who had let go of expectations, just to hear each other more clearly. As we sat down on a weathered bench and asked,
Do you feel different?
I looked out at the still water and nodded. I no longer need someone to prove I'm worthy. And I don't feel lonely because of it. He took my hand. This time, no fleeting brush, no subtle glance, just a steady, quiet hold. No declarations, no labels.
I'm here, if you'll stay.
That night, I sat alone on the front porch, scribbling into an old notebook under the porch light, and I suddenly understood. Rebirth doesn't mean changing everything. It means seeing everything more clearly, more gently, more honestly. I no longer needed love to feel whole. But if love showed up, in the form of someone who listened, who stayed, who moved at the rhythm of trust, then maybe I was finally ready to invite it in. Not everyone makes your heart race, but some people, if they stay long enough, will remind you of who you were before you forgot your own light. And in the end, you don't love them because they're extraordinary. You love them because they bring you home to yourself. I stood by the window, herbal tea in hand, gazing out at the garden. The lavender we planted yesterday was already leaning a little in the morning breeze, but it was still there, still holding on, still rooted in the soil, whispering silently to the sky. I haven't bloomed yet, but I'm alive. Evan had left early that morning to return to the city. Life was waiting for him, just like life waits for all of us after a gentle brush with something new. I didn't walk him to his car. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't need to. You don't have to hold on to someone who truly wants to stay. Before leaving, he simply said, "I'm not leaving with a plan, just a hope. If you want, I'll always come back. Not to do anything grand, just to be here." I nodded. No promises, no dates on a calendar, just a mutual understanding that neither of us needed to hide from the light inside anymore. That afternoon, I sat in a therapist's office for the first time in years. Not to look for answers, but to say out loud what I'd been whispering to myself for far too long. The therapist asked, "So, why are you here today?" I looked her in the eye and smiled gently, because I've started to feel like I want to live fully again. And I'm scared that if I don't say that out loud, I'll fall back into another long silence. I told her about Evan, about the Tuesday doorbell, about a gaze that didn't flinch, about a fleeting touch, less than a love confession, but stronger than any kiss I've ever known, about the dinners, the wine, the porch, the breeze that made me no longer want to keep my heart locked shut. "And do you think you're in love?" she asked. I shook my head, then nodded. "I think I'm learning how to love again. Not someone else, but a part of me I'd long forgotten. The part that still feels, still waits, still smiles when someone remembers even the smallest thing I like." When I stepped out of that office, the late afternoon sun spilled across the brick sidewalk. I could smell dry leaves, orange peels from the cafe down the street, autumn in the air, everything familiar. But today, I could actually smell it. I wasn't waiting for a text from Evan. I didn't need to, because no matter what comes next, I found the woman I lost. Buried beneath the roles, the weight, the silence. A woman who knows how to stand in the light, not with her head bowed, not asking for permission, just standing tall and breathing deeply. If you've ever felt like your heart has fallen asleep, remember this. It isn't dead. It's just waiting for a person or a moment gentle enough to call you back home. Push and subscribe to this channel to keep listening to whispers like these. From one person to another, from one heart to a whole world. Because sometimes, one story is enough to help you live differently. Claire sat quietly in the waiting room, her fingers gently turning the wedding ring she no longer wore, yet still reached for whenever she felt unsettled. Outside there was no rain, but the sky was veiled in a soft layer of cloud, like the way her heart felt now, no longer in pain, but not yet fully clear. The door opened. A voice soft as breath invited her in. No harsh lighting, no reclining chair like in the movies, just a softly lit room, a few small potted plants, and a middle-aged woman with the kind of smile that made it feel like she'd known Claire for years. "Is this your first time in therapy?" Claire nodded. "But not because I haven't had anything to say before," she added. "Just today, I'm finally ready to stop saying it only to myself." She began to share, not in order, not trying to make it neat. Just an honest stream of moments. The Tuesday doorbell, that familiar grown-up face, the cinnamon coffee, a gaze that lingered just a little too long. "Evan didn't do anything wrong," she said. "And neither did I. But still, there was this voice in my head telling me to stop." "And why do you think that voice was there?" the therapist asked. "Because I'm a mother. Because I used to be a wife. Because it's been so long since I let myself feel anything real." She paused, then looked straight into the therapist's eyes, her own beginning to glisten. "I'm not here to be told whether I should fall in love. I'm just here to ask, do I have permission?" The room went quiet, as if to let that question echo a little longer. The therapist didn't answer right away. She looked at Claire with the tenderness of someone who sees a child learning how to name a pain for the first time. Then she spoke slowly, gently. "Your heart hasn't aged. You've just forgotten that it's still beating." Claire smiled, a trembling smile, part forgiveness, part release. That night back home, she sat beneath the soft glow of her desk lamp. She pulled an old box of stationery from the drawer, not to write anyone else, but to write to herself, to the woman she had once misplaced in all the noise of roles and resilience. Dear you, I see you now. The woman who became so good at enduring. She forgot how to love herself gently. The one who once thought joy was a luxury. You don't have to be strong all the time anymore. You just have to be real and present. And if one day someone comes and knocks softly on your heart, without hurting it, let them in. Not for them, but because you deserve the light they carry. Evan returned. No flowers, no wine, nothing but himself, with eyes that didn't expect, didn't question, just saw her and said,
I'm here, if you're ready.
I didn't run into his arms. I didn't rush to the porch like a movie ending. I simply stood in the doorway and smiled, softly, steadily, honestly, not because love had arrived, but because peace had returned. You are never too late to love, never too late to believe that your feelings deserve respect. You just need enough courage to no longer abandon yourself. If you've ever felt your heart fall silent, remember, it never stopped beating. It was just waiting for you to return and whisper back, I'm ready to feel again. Pushpin, thank you for being here and for feeling this. Subscribe to this channel if you need more quiet whispers like these, because sometimes all it takes is one story at the right time to change how you live. If someone had told me that a single doorbell on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon would change the rhythm of my heart, I would have laughed. I don't live in the kind of days that tremble easily anymore. Surprises, romance, shifts of fate. I folded those things up long ago, tucked them neatly into the quietest drawers of this quiet little house. And yet, one ring, one person stepping across the threshold, one glance held a second too long, one harmless greeting, and suddenly, all the things I thought I had forgotten began to stir. That afternoon, the breeze slipped through the kitchen window, teasing the corner of my old linen curtain. I had just finished folding laundry and was about to reward myself with a second cup of coffee when the doorbell rang. Funny thing, a house that's been quiet long enough turns any sound into something startling. And sometimes it's not that the bell is too loud. It's that the heart hasn't been knocked on in a while. I walked to the door. No message, no delivery. No one had any real reason to visit a middle-aged woman living alone in an aging house at the end of a sleepy cul-de-sac. I opened the door. And just like that, silence didn't live here anymore. Standing in front of me, tall, bright-eyed, with that warm, familiar smile, was Evan, my son's childhood best friend. 10 years. It had been 10 years since I last saw that boy. Since they both moved away, took separate paths, and I assumed Evan would remain a string of photos buried somewhere in my phone. But now, it wasn't that boy standing in front of me. It was a man. Confident. Composed. Something about him made me pause. Not because I didn't recognize him, but because my heart hadn't braced itself for a flutter that light. His voice was deeper, but it still held that familiar mischief. I laughed, though I wasn't sure if it was from nerves or something far more tender.